So recently I made a video about the 5 main reasons why I decided to leave Canada. And ever since then, I've been getting a lot of questions of what am I doing with my taxes, investments, and essentially my life. And so that's why in this video, I'm going to share with you everything that I'm doing with my personal finances now that I've left Canada. Hey, if you're new here, my name is Michael Lee Kim and I'm a financial coach, CPA, TEDx speaker, and digital nomad. And my goal is to help you learn how to retire young, not old, all while enjoying life. Okay, and so one of the most common questions I get is, what am I doing in terms of my taxes? Am I planning to pay taxes in Canada? Where am I paying taxes? What's happening? Okay, and so for those of you that don't know, in Canada, you get taxed based on your tax residency status. Now, to determine your tax residency, it actually isn't really based on whether you're living in Canada or not. You could be living outside of Canada and still be considered a tax resident of Canada. And so your tax residency is actually based on your ties to Canada. And there are two types of ties, primary ties and secondary ties. Primary ties includes whether you have a home in Canada, a spouse or common law partner in Canada, or dependents living in Canada. While secondary ties include if you have a Canadian driver's license, health card, health insurance, bank accounts, memberships, and so on. And so to determine your tax residency, the CRA will evaluate both your primary and secondary ties. And there are 4 main types of residencies. The first being a factual resident. This is where you have significant ties to Canada. And so even if you're living abroad for most of the year, if you just have one primary tie, you'll likely still be considered a tax resident of Canada. And as a factual resident, you would be taxed on your worldwide income, which is essentially any income that you generate in or outside of Canada. The second type of residency is a deemed resident. You'd be considered a deemed resident of Canada if you're in Canada for more than 183 days of the year and you're not a tax resident in any other country. And so similarly to a factual resident, as a deemed resident, you would be taxed on your worldwide income as well. The third type of resident is a non-resident. This is where you sever your ties with Canada and you live outside of Canada for more than 183 days of the year and you've become a tax resident of another country. And in this case, you would only have to pay taxes on any income generated within Canada. And any income generated outside of Canada would be taxed in your new country. The fourth type of residency is a deemed non-resident. This is where you maintain your residential ties to Canada, but you're still considered a resident of another country under a certain tax treaty. And so in this case, you would still be considered a non-resident of Canada, so you would only be taxed on any Canadian-sourced income. And so these are the 4 different types of tax residencies in Canada. Now, for me, I'm actually still considered a factual resident of Canada. And so even though I'm spending most of my time outside of Canada, and I actually don't really have any major primary ties to Canada, like I don't have any secret child that I'm looking after in Canada, the only thing missing is that I haven't decided as to which country I actually want to be a tax resident in. And that's one of the reasons why for over the past 2 years, I've been just traveling around the world trying to figure out where do I actually want to settle down in. And there's a few criteria that I have. The first criteria is that obviously I need to enjoy living in that certain country. Number 2, the country has to be foreigner friendly and have a very efficient tax system. Number 3, access to good, high quality healthcare. And lastly, that it's safe and politically stable. Now, after traveling to over 20 countries over the past few years, there's definitely a few countries out there that have caught my eye, and I could actually see myself living and moving to long term. But I'd still like to spend a little bit more time in those places before I make any final decisions. And so guys, help me out here. Let me know in the comments below if I should be considering moving to any specific country. Okay, and so the second common question that I get is, how should I set up my investments if I plan to leave Canada? And so although I'm still considered a factual resident of Canada, in the next few years, I do plan to change my residency status. And so that's the reason why I've been setting up my investments in a way easy for me to sever my ties when I decide to make this decision. And so this is one of the main reasons why I decided not to buy any real estate in Canada. Because real estate is, of course, a physical asset, so it's kind of difficult to move it to another country. It could be considered a very strong primary or secondary tie to Canada. And so that's the reason why I decided to invest all of my investments into the stock market, which is a lot easier to move outside of Canada if needed. So initially, before I was planning to settle down and live in Canada, I would use a lot of brokers like Wealthsimple and Questrade to manage my investments. But ever since I decided that I would leave Canada, I actually decided to start using an international broker called Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers is a global investing platform available in over 200 countries where you can, number one, hold money in many different currencies. Number two, it's really cost efficient in order to make trades. And lastly, most importantly, when you become a non-resident, you're able to just easily change your address on the platform and without needing to close or move any of your investment accounts. Now, this is definitely a more complicated platform to use and it's not that user-friendly, but if you are planning to leave Canada, it could be worthwhile to learn how to actually use this platform so that when you do leave Canada, it's really easy to make those transitions. Now, with the RSP and TFSA, there are definitely some major tax considerations if you plan to leave Canada. For the RSP, once you become a non-resident, you cannot contribute more to your RSP. But any money that you've already invested and can still continue growing, tax deferred. Now, any withdrawals from the RSP is going to be subject to taxes based on the tax treaty of the country that you move to. Now, because I don't really know as to which country that I'm planning to leave to, I honestly don't really know as to how much I should contribute to my RSP, but I am assuming that whatever country that I move to is typically going to be in a lower tax rate. And so that's the reason why I'm still contributing to my RSP so that I could reduce my taxes while I'm in Canada and withdraw this money when I'm in a lower tax bracket in another country. Now, in terms of my TFSA, after you become a non-resident, you can't contribute to your TFSA anymore. And although you can keep your TFSA open, many countries won't recognize a tax-free status of your TFSA. And so depending on which country I plan to move to, I will likely have to withdraw the money out of my TFSA and invest it accordingly. But since I'm still considered a factual resident, I can still contribute to my TFSA and benefit from its tax-free status. And so this is how I'm structuring my investments. Now you might be wondering, what is it actually like to live outside of Canada? Well, over the past 2 years I've been doing this, let's just say that there's a lot of things that I wish I knew about living abroad outside of Canada. And so here are 3 tips that you should know if you're planning to live abroad outside of Canada. The first being cost of living. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's so cheap to live in another country. And there is some truth to this, but not all the time. Yes, in many countries outside of Canada, it is a lot cheaper to live there. However, you actually have to be living there, not just as a tourist. For example, one of the biggest living costs is rent. And for the past few years, I've kind of just been living in different countries for about 1 to 2 months each. But the thing is, because I have these very short-term leases, I have to stay in Airbnbs that are typically a lot more expensive than if I were to sign a long-term lease. For example, in Medellin, Colombia, which is where I am now, I'm paying about $1,500 per month for an Airbnb. But I was talking to a lot of my local friends here and they're like, what, you're paying that much? They're only paying about like $600 or $800 a month. I'm literally paying double the price simply because I have to stay in short-term leases. And so something that I'm going to start doing in the future is having a home-based country where I'm going to stay there for 6 months to a year. And that way I'm able to sign a long-term lease and significantly reduce my cost of living. And from there, then I'm going to travel to other countries nearby. Another thing that I learned over the past 2 years I've been traveling around the world is to be aware of the location and the timing of the country that you're going to live in. So in October 2023, I did my first digital nomad trip in Puerto Escondido, Mexico. And it was literally a magical experience. Every day the weather was sunny and beautiful, and I made so many friends, and it was such a great time. But then in 2024, I decided that I wanted to repeat this experience. But the thing is, I went in August, which is in their rainy season, and it literally rained for 2 weeks straight. There was so much rain and moisture in the air that literally everything in my apartment started growing mold. And because there was so much flooding everywhere, there was actually a lot of bacteria into the beaches, and I ended up getting a skin infection. And so when I went back in 2024, I was like, oh my god, this is not what I expected. And so that's the reason why in certain places in the world, it can be very beautiful depending on the time that you go in, or very miserable. It's just like Canada, right? We have our summers, which is beautiful, and then we have our winters, which is, dreadful. And so this is why if you're planning to live in a country long term, I highly recommend living there for at least 1 to 2 years before deciding if you actually want to stay there long term. Because if you only live there for a few months, you might not have the full picture of what it's actually like to live there. And that's the reason why, as I'm trying to choose a country that I'm planning to settle down in, I really want to spend a lot more time in that country before I make any final decisions. And the last thing I wish I knew about leaving Canada and living abroad is community. I'll be honest, being a solo traveler gets pretty lonely sometimes, being away from family and being away from friends. Even for me, who's a huge introvert, and I actually like spending a lot of time alone. And so over the past few years, because I've been staying in one country for only about a month at a time, it's been really hard for me to develop any meaningful connections with anyone because a month it really isn't a lot of time. And so that's the reason why I'm going to be traveling to a certain country for at least 2 to 6 months at a time so that I could actually integrate myself within that community. For example, here in Medellin, I've been here for the past 2 months. And because this was a longer period of time, I've actually been able to make a lot of amazing friends here. And if I only had stayed here for a month, I probably wouldn't have made any of these friends. And at the end of the day, this is what really makes your experience living in a country. My most favorite places in the world isn't necessarily the most beautiful or the most amount of tourist things to see and do. It's about the experiences and the people that I've met in those specific countries. And so this is how I'm structuring my taxes, investments, and my life now that I'm living abroad outside of Canada. And this is the reason why it's so important for you to learn about how to effectively manage your personal finances. Because when you're able to do this, you're able to figure out what you need to start doing to create the life that you actually want. This is really how I've been able to create the life that I have today. And I'll be honest, it's still a work in progress. I don't exactly know what my life is going to specifically look like. But the thing is, I don't need to know everything. You see, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to have everything planned out and everything figured out before they make any changes in their life. But the thing is, you can try to plan and try to predict everything as much as possible, but eventually you just gotta take the leap and trust yourself that you can figure it out. Now, if you want to keep in touch with me, then make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me on Instagram, where I share behind the scenes and more of my travels. Also, if you want to learn about the 5 main reasons why I decided to leave Canada and why you might want to as well, then make sure to watch this video over here. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.